thought that was a bollocking. You know, the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment, I mean, as Vicky suggested, right, I am tempted to mock the government's lack of commitment or action in dealing with climate change. But the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, while accepting that many have criticised the government's emissions target as not ambitious enough, the bigger issue, she said, is how do we chart the pathway? How do we change the direction in which we are travelling? You saw the gross figure on that video of by how much New Zealand's emissions have risen by. The net figure between 1990 and 2015, New Zealand's net emissions have risen by 64%. All the people on our panel tonight are committed to doing exactly what the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment said we should do. Change the direction in which we're travelling. Forget about the targets. Change the direction in which we are travelling. Please let me introduce them. You've met Mickey. Mickey, you see, that's how dreadful it was today between us. You've met Vicky already. Let me introduce Rangimarie Hunia, the Chief Executive of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Whaimaia, the organisation charged with advancing the aspirations of the hapu from social, economic, environmental points of view. Helen O'Sullivan is Chief Executive of Ockham Residential, which aims for affordable, quality, sustainable housing. I met somebody tonight who's bought two Ockham apartments. David Woods, Chairman of the Impact Enterprise Fund, which aims for market rate returns plus beneficial social and environmental outcomes. Martin McMullen is with the NZTA, Connected Journey Solutions Director is his title. I've got no idea what that means, but innovation and new technology are his specialties. And Jim Quinn is Chief of Strategy for the Auckland Council. Please welcome them all, ladies and gentlemen. Al Gore, the sainted Al Gore, said that there's a danger of moving from denial to despair without stopping on the way. And it does occur to me that given that 50% of our emissions, and let me talk to you first, Vicky, about this, 50% of our emissions in New Zealand are from the agricultural sector, and report after report after report says we have no hope of making a dent in our climate change emissions unless we change our land use. And you know what that means, right? How can anybody in Auckland, Vicky, make a difference?
Well, one of the other key things in this report is about road transport. So it's one of the fastest increasing emissions is in road transport. So it's 78% over the period that we measure. So car use in New Zealand is one of the highest in the OECD, and we have quite an old fleet. So there is quite a bit in there that Aucklanders could do, and I think there is some interesting things that NZTA is thinking about in terms of thinking about your transport use as a service. So I think that would be good to hear about. Just on our agricultural emissions, there are 3 gases that are important in that, and so it's not just about land use, but also how we treat methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. And farmers who are really productive are also doing very well on reducing their emissions in carbon dioxide use. So that's, fantastic. The good farmers are doing that. Nitrous oxide is basically fertiliser, and we need to keep working on what do we do about that. And methane's the hard one. Nobody in the world has actually cracked how do you stop cows and sheep burping. So even if we have fewer cows, they're still going to burp. A lot of research in there, and I don't think it's as far away as we might think. So there is hope in that. One of the things that's been really interesting lately is in June, the Dairy Action Plan Accord was announced, and that is dairy farmers looking for the first time at measuring their methane emissions, looking at action plans for reducing their emissions on farm. So that's got to happen too.
Just to get the elephant in the room out of the door, if you'll excuse the metaphor, can I just check with the panellists, in the interests of the climate, have any of them, or would any of them, be willing to give up animal products? Jim?
Got me. Unlikely, I think. I do like them, so...
I'll do it if Jim does it. Yes.
Okay, no, stop it there. In the interests of the environment, you've given up animal products?
Yes.
Completely, no milk, no meat?
No meat. Dairy I'd be a little hesitant on, but everything else okay.
All right. I'm glad I drilled down into that one. Helen?
No, but I'm willing to shop sustainably as a consumer.
Helen drives very fast cars and uses a lot of fossil fuels, ladies and gentlemen.
But I commute in a lift.
I'm just saying. Yes. Next.
Kārea no, not yet. One day maybe.
Vicky?
I have reduced use of animal products.
All right. I don't know whether this
Not
is sufficient,
completely.
actually. You might like to mull this over in the course of the proceedings. Should we really be putting our mouths where our mouths are? Or is that just a step too far? In the interest of finding out what is being done, or as the Parliamentary Commission on the Environment put it, how far we are along the path, let me first of all ask Helen what she thinks she's contributing in terms of Ockham Residential.
Well, one of the things we are trying to do at Ockham, I think medium density housing is a large part of the solution here. We love building our properties on transport nodes, so we build them right next to train stations, on top of train stations, right next to cycle paths, so that the opportunity is there to actually live a low emissions lifestyle in terms of your journey to and from your employment. And also, I think one of our developments, Daisy, has no car parking at all, but it has 2 shared cars, which will be run as part of the
They're
shared
electric
car
vehicles,
system.
right?
One of them's a hybrid, and the other is, we've provided for an electric car. At the moment, we're going to just try, because there's some complications around getting electric cars in the shared scheme. So we've provided for that as a future-proofing option. And also in our newer developments, we're providing for the potential to build in charging for electric cars when people are at that point they want to actually bring them into the car parks in the buildings, so that they can actually do that in the future.
One of the reasons that it interests me what you're doing, and this is by no means an advertisement for Ockham Residential, but a lot of people would say people can't do without their cars. They want their gardens, they want their cars. They're going to have to live way the hell out of Auckland because there's nothing affordable. You've said if people can be persuaded that they don't need that stuff, then everything can be turned around.
Yeah, I think so, because the thing is, proximity is the most important thing, I think, for housing. You know, we can all, I live in Auckland, so I don't have to drive an hour and a half every night and morning to get to and from work. That's why I live here, because I think it's one of the most awesome cities in the world, but I'm not going to spend 3 hours a day commuting to do it. So building houses that people can afford in places that they want to live at prices and places they want to be, I think is a distinct part of the solution to it. But like the data says something like 95% of the time your car sits still. And I know I live in one of our developments, and I think I've driven my car once so far this week. I really am going to have to make the decision at some point that a car share would be a great solution for that. You know, just the money I have tied up in it is ridiculous.
Second only, of course, to property developers in the list of most hated people are investment fund managers, which brings me to David. David claims to be able to make a profit while doing good. How does that work?
Thank you, Kim. I think if you look at the UN Sustainable Goals and the OECD's target to meet them, for us to meet all those goals by 2030, we need another $20 trillion invested. So conventional ways of funding just aren't going to get there. So what we find more and more coming out of Europe and the US, and now increasingly here in New Zealand, is people saying, we'll invest in your housing project or in this clean water project, but we want measurable environmental outcomes that are better in terms of water quality, in terms of silt levels, in terms of use of the water, drinking water, not just a financial return. And it works with a combination of government, who can often think longer than the private sector, philanthropists, who often give grants to help the studies to set the structures up, and pension funds, Adrian Orr was quoted earlier, and other investors doing it. So it's a combination of everybody. And this area is growing dramatically in many parts of the world, and 2/3 of the fund managers claim, looking backwards, the results not to sacrifice financial return, they just take a bit more risk to get a measurable environmental or social outcome as well.
And how did the results of the investment get measured?
There are a number of independent bodies. This tends to come out of World Bank statistics and long-term statistics and organizations like that, then setting themselves up. You've got an organization in New Zealand, I don't want to plug anybody, called EnviroStrat, who, if you look at the measures for water quality and water projects and water funds, have a whole list of metrics that the borrower and the lender sit down and say, what are we going to measure against?
But it requires sacrifice on the part of the individual to say, I will gain, say, some of the profit in order that I will improve the planet?
Well, there's two answers to that. One is, if you take a bit more risk, no, you don't give up, you just take more risk. But the other answer is to quantify what an environmental or social return is worth to you. What's it worth to give somebody an affordable house, let somebody buy an affordable house and lower health bills and improve education levels? How do you put a monetary value on that? How do you put a monetary value on better water quality? And that's where the debate is at the moment in New Zealand, and particularly with younger investors. They're saying to the stale, male and pale brigade that run the financial industry, we want to see things done differently.
Is this also to do with a change in the accounting system? A change from measuring things in terms of GDP, or is that another issue?
No, I think that's a separate issue.
Right. Martin.
But that's coming.
Hey?
That's coming.
Will it help?
I think so.
Yeah. Martin, you were talking before, and it all comes down to giving people choice, right? Not, I think the parlance these days is nudging people towards things rather than shoving them towards things because it's the right thing to do. And you were telling us about an interesting policy that you have in Queenstown. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so on the 24th of August, we launched a pilot into Queenstown around an application that gives people live transport choices, regardless of the modes. And, you know, that really wants to start to create like a mobility marketplace. So, if you think,
people arrive in Queenstown,
yeah,
they go to somewhere and say, how do I get from here to there?
Yeah, that's right.
And you say, sure, you can't get there from here. No, it's a joke.
Well, you can get a helicopter.
But only the Irishman will understand. Yes. And you give them a choice of what?
any mode, so any commercial or active mode of transport will be able to be procured from there. So in Queenstown, you've got the ski shuttles, the public transport, the taxis, rideshare, carpool, water taxis, heli skiing if you're into heli skiing, and e-bikes, normal cycling, and also walking options as well. So what we want to do is create the marketplace so people can sell their services into it, but eventually what we want to start to do is influence people's behaviours by making micro investments into that marketplace to encourage them to do the right mode of transport. Because what we really need, and Queenstown's a fine example of this, is we need to either get people into alternative modes of transport or increase the utilisation of the vehicles that we've already got in Queenstown.
And you'll be using a price mechanism for this. Would you be raising the price of the things that you don't want people to do?
Well, that's what, by having a marketplace, it allows you to influence those things in the future if the pilots are successful.
Right.
You encourage, and that's not just around transport choices, but you factor in sustainability into that as well. So if your travel choices are actually improving the environment that you're in, you may find that you may get some sort of incentivization in the future. If your travel choices are actually undermining the environment that you're in, you may find that there may be some cost loading put on what you want to do, but ultimately you'll have a choice either way.
How do you feel about this, Hanier? I mean, this is the only way people can exercise full choice in that sense is if they have loads of money, right? Otherwise, your lack of money limits your choice. Is Martin talking about a perfect world, or is he talking about stuff that can really work?
Oh, look, I think Martin's talking from his context, and I think when I look at the Ngāti Whātua context particularly, tuatahi, ka mihi kia koutou, kua whakawhaiti, I roto I tēnei kaupapa, kia koutou katoa e hara mai ki te whakarongo maina tēnā koutou. Look, I think the most important part for us is that change doesn't happen overnight, Kim. Change is an intergenerational pursuit. And so when I think about the ups and downs, and we talk about generational change here, to me it's about making sure that intergenerational values, philosophies and principles are sustained over generations. That's how you make the biggest difference, I think, in this dynamic here. Where it comes to inequality, I think alleviating poverty and environmental sustainability must go hand in hand.
We were talking about, thank you. We're talking about the long view of Māori earlier and how that makes it, in a way, easier to imagine the consequence of actions not taken or actions taken. Do you think that that's evident in terms of what you're doing?
Oh, without a doubt. When I think about Ngāti Whātua's view of the world, it's not about Rangi Māori in the current position. I've inherited a legacy. I've inherited a view of the world. I've inherited a particular philosophy and practice. When I think about environmental sustainability, climate change and the like, for us the basis of that is Papatūānuku. And we think about her. We think about her as Mother Earth. We think about her as the procreator. And we think about her in terms of where we return to when we leave this world. And the question around how, what do we give, what is her legacy? Are we okay with creating harm for her, with our mother? Are we okay with that? I think a lot of those views and perspectives make it a lot easier to practice over time. There are a whole lot of, and I think the other part for us is there has to be a level of resilience, and Vicky, you talked about this, right? Resilience means things might happen in this generation, but the reality is we've got to be really clear about the outcome in the long game, and I think we have learnt that. We are trying to adapt to that, and we are trying to ensure that we move forward toward that.
Can you give me an example of how?
Oh, yeah, sure. Look, I think 1951, for an example, Ngāti Whātua Rākei had 1/4 of an acre. That was an urupā. So we have had loss of land, we have had land alienation, we have had poverty, we have had death, we have become wards of the state. We've had every single ugly circumstance that we are talking about really openly, actually, in the New Zealand context. Not more than 2 generations later, because my mum's was born at that time. Not more than 2 generations later, we've got $1 billion, and we practice what Martin's talking about. You cannot think about, in our view, intergenerational wealth creation if you don't also think about growing people at the same time. So I think you can do it. I think we have done that. And now we're also at a point where you get to a point in life where you have the means to make your own decisions. And for us, the biggest change we're making is when we put our own skin in the game, when we put our own investment into the game, and we look for partners who actually have the same view, long-term view, about change, prosperity and beauty of Aotearoa New Zealand. That's what I think is really beautiful about the way that we are thinking.
Thank you for that. Jim, as Chief of Strategy Auckland Council, I mean, that's a big title, right? You have to pull all these threads together. It's a city where people have different ideas, people have different aspirations. Liz was talking before about how action needs to be collective when it comes to climate change, which is a huge umbrella term we use, right? She must be some kind of socialist, right? I mean, I know neoliberalism is dead, but collective action. Can you see Auckland as a place where collective action can take place?
I don't think we have much choice. I think we have to act. I think Auckland's advantage, the amalgamation of Auckland's created a collective view of the whole of Auckland rather than a scrap between 8 or 9 different factions. We're, of course, in a political system which will change every term or multi-terms, but we've got a very strong underpinning of the Auckland Plan and a long-term view, a 30-year view. I think somebody asked me earlier today, is there a silver bullet for this? And of course, there's not. You've got to do lots of little things all the time, and you've got to have some very grand long views, and you've got to stick to them, because if you take a faddish approach, I think you're nailed. So we're doing great small things, and I just learned this afternoon the building we're in Albert Street has got a Green Star 6 rating now, which is a big step, but it's one building, which is a good thing.
Does everybody know what that means? Can you explain, perhaps, in a little more detail about what that means?
John will correct me, but look, it's the highest standard a building can be fitted to. We've had to retrofit this because we've moved into it, but it's all of the way it uses energy, the way it's fitted out, the way the climate control works. So it's a really good use of the environment. It's about having the right sort of lighting from a sustainability perspective. So we're doing things such as that. I think one of the interesting things that Vicky talked about, roads. One of the big switches I think Auckland's got to get to is everybody knows we've got congestion. We're all a bit relieved that our NZTA colleagues have built a tunnel for us, which has eased it a bit for now. But
it'll just encourage them, though, won't it?
Well, yeah, and the big switch for me, I'm intrigued because I'm involved in thinking through what pricing signals we give to help people make a choice. We've got Auckland Transport and NZTA investing well in electric trains and other modes of transport. But when I talk to folk, most folks say to me, I really can't wait till you solve this congestion thing so that everybody gets out of my way, rather than what am I going to do to get out of the way. And I think if we can just flick that one switch, because we're growing, I think it's 90 million journeys a year now, from a very low base. So we're really making some great strides. Our mayor is has led the talk about the plastic bags. We've got the Million Trees initiative. So it's about doing big things that are symbols of dragging us all to think collectively about those sorts of outcomes.
Well, thank you for that nudge in the direction of the Mayor. We'll stop for a non-commercial break now. The Mayor, of course, is en route to Paris to the conference looking at cities dealing with climate change. Electric vehicles, let's talk about electric vehicles. The Parliamentary Commission for the Environment, Jan Wright, says this is the number one thing we can do. And certainly, as Phil Goff said, in Auckland, there's a huge scope for having electric vehicles. Is there the infrastructure for them? If not, when will it be there? Are you best able to talk to this, Jim?
Martin, I'm sure could have a crack. I think most folk who are, the first hurdle people go through is range anxiety. That's mostly solved, I think, unless you're going a long, long way. And most folk will charge at home and return home. So the public requirement is much less than I think people intuitively think. But there are stations, or whatever they're called, being installed. I know I went to an opening one in Newmarket. So the capability is there. I think like every industry, we seem to have, when the opportunity was there to have a single way of getting things done, industry have given us a few. So there's a adapter requirement on some cars, I believe. But the point is, it's the ability is there. It's about people being prepared to go there now.
We need not only for people to have electric vehicles, but also to share electric vehicles with others, right? There's no point in everybody driving an electric vehicle, because we'll just have to build more roads, and that will divert resources from something else, even though greenhouse gases will be saved, presumably. When will electric vehicles be cheap enough and available enough to people? Do you know?
Well, they're getting cheaper and cheaper all the time. I think the last time I looked, you can pick up a 2013 Nissan Leaf on TradeMe for less than $10,000 now.
Yeah.
Whereas actually you factor the cost of not paying fuel in over 3 years, it will have paid for itself.
Yeah, but you need the money in the first place, right? It's like solar power.
Absolutely.
You know, the investment needs to happen before the payoff.
But that goes with all car payments, and that's where I think one of the things that's, you know, will be realistically achieved in the next 10 years or so are shared fleets of cars, whether that's, you know, things like City Hop today, and then as the technology becomes more mature, is moving into shared fleets of autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles, but they are still just cars. We really need to get change people's behaviours to get them being more active, using public transport, and then as a further mitigation is shared fleets, and then the last resort should be driving your own car, right?
Do you need more? Sorry, Helen, you wanted to say something?
There are some practicalities around it. There's a report recently about a Sydney apartment building where they've got 3 Teslas, and when all 3 of them are charging, the lift doesn't work.
Nor the toasters, I imagine.
I imagine that's a problem as well.
But nevertheless, the idea behind electric cars is kind of brilliant. Is the government putting enough incentives into encouraging people to get into them? Any ideas?
I haven't seen a lot. I guess I think the practicalities around the infrastructure are probably the big thing. You know, we've looked at it in our apartment buildings, because where are you going to? It's all very well if you've got a house and a garage and you can plug it in when you get home.
Yeah.
But if you've got an apartment building with 60 car parks in it, how do you wire up 60 car parks? What's the, you know, if we'd put in sufficient electric car charging for all 60 of those car parks to be charging, we'd have had to put another $250,000 worth of transformer on the site, which is probably not going to be used for a while, and there's a whole trade-off around housing affordability there. And I think those conversations and the joined-up thinking around that is probably where local and central government have to take a real lead role in terms of what's the best outcome for New Zealand Inc. and how do we achieve that, because the short-term decision may be quite a different one to the long-term decision.
One of the suggestions, sorry, Becky, carry on.
I was just going to say one of the issues is supply. So, you know, how do you actually create enough demand in New Zealand for electric vehicles, so therefore the price will come down and therefore the infrastructure won't be such a big barrier. And I mean, we do have a goal of 64,000 electric vehicles by 2021, which is a good start. 30 private sector firms have also pledged to basically have their fleets committed to EVs by 2019. So I think some of this will change pretty rapidly. I think the other bit's important though, that Martin was talking about, that EVs are kind of the current wave of new technology, but you know, personalised air transport's not too far away either. So that whole mobility, you know, thinking about your mobility as a service and what
personalised air transport.
Yeah. So that's being trialled at the moment. So there's a race on to, you saw the drones in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai with the police officers. I think there's, trials potentially happening.
This is not a
close to
useful
home.
thing to say, though, is it?
Well,
Because I'm
think
not
it's
going to
very
buy
useful.
I'm not going to buy the electric vehicle because I'm going to be hanging out for the personalised air transporter.
Well, I think the point is that there'll be some people who want an EV, and there'll be some people who end up wanting to be picked up from their own house, and almost be like a Uber of shared taxis.
This,
but
lady,
in
it's
the
not
sky.
what I expected from somebody from the Ministry for the Environment. She's talking about a technological fix, ladies and gentlemen. And this is not what I ever thought I'd hear you say. But it brings us on to an important issue. Technological fixes. Do we need to hang out for them, or do we need to change our behaviour now? Jim?
I think both. I don't think it's not a coin toss you need to make. We need to act now, and we need to do what's within our capability.
But there are people who say, don't worry about it. We'll have the vaccination to stop the cows belching the methane.
Sure.
And we'll have the personalised air transportation, so we won't have to build roads anymore, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, but you've got to live within what you can foresee right now, and if you just wait for everything, I just don't think you'll achieve anything. So yes, we're all working on different future things that we're aware of, waiting to see how those models evolve, waiting to see when they tip. All of these things seem to take longer to tip than you intuitively think. But we've got to get on and do things now because the problem is here now. And so I don't think it's a coin toss.
I agree, and I think New Zealanders kind of want to do that. We've seen that with plastic bags. We're not waiting until there's a new way of having our groceries put into, biodegradable bags. Consumers actually have driven New World and Countdown coming out and saying we're going to phase these out. So I think, people want to do things in New Zealand. That's my experience. And
So, that's an interesting example you raise, actually, because there are people who say the government should have done something. The government should have banned those plastic bags. You're saying it's better if people reach decisions by themselves?
Well, I don't know about you, Kim, but when somebody tells me to do something, I don't tend to do it.
Yeah,
Or if I do it,
I've
I
heard
do
that.
the very minimum thing that you've asked me to do, because I don't like authority. And most Kiwis, I think, that whole piece of power in the consumer's hands, and it's much better, well, from my point of view, much better that we don't have to regulate everything in order to get change. Because the world is changing so fast that regulation will never keep up with that. And so we need people to nudge into different behaviour and drive some of consumers can drive some of the change here.
But you also don't want to terrify the wits out of people too much so that they become paralysed and unable to change.
No,
No, that's right.
You've got to co-create the future with them. That's the really thing. We've got to think big and start today. And the best way of understanding what the future is going to look like is, we create it together. And I think that is where technology and behaviour change go hand in hand. And you don't do stuff to people, you do it with them.
There are unintended consequences from technology, of course, and a lot of people are averse to seeing it as part of the solution because of that. Have you got examples of how technology can positively and without unintended consequences help the situation? Even EVs are a moot point because they still have to be manufactured, right? What are you going to do with your old cars? It's a huge period of wasted resources before there's any gain.
Yeah, but that's still about getting things done now and living with what we've got. But look at it at its simplest. Look what LED lights are doing for us now. And that's a pretty minor tech change, but it's really enhancing or reducing the power use and enabling us to live within the hydro resources we've got rather than having to build coal-fired or whatever other options. So look, there's small examples like that right through to the big ones, and Martin, I know, is thinking a lot about mobility as a shared service and automated cars and all the benefits that come from those things. But there are things that we will worry about stranding assets on the way through, but we've still got to act now and do all those smaller steps.
Yeah.
Just to add to what Jim said, I think if you look at what the UK has done, where they've just said no more petrol cars after 2040, it's giving people time to adapt and find the technical solutions, but also change their behaviour. Just gives them long enough to do it.
That kind of contradicts what we were just saying, of course, doesn't it? That there is a time for the government to say, this is the line in the sand and this is what's going to happen. I mean, the UK government also has a Climate Change Act, which has, a commission for climate change, and it has carbon budgets, and it has targets, and it has accountability if those targets aren't met. It's clearly a great deal more worried, committed, authoritarian than we are.
All of those, but it has a much higher population density.
Does that make it more necessary to be authoritarian? Is that what you're suggesting? I mean, really, yes, it has, like 60 million people or whatever, but what is the difference?
It's not my field particularly, but I think that if you look at highly concentrated urban areas, then there is perhaps less democracy in those than in areas like New Zealand, where population density is relatively low.
Except that, of course.
I do think the problem's a lot more noticeable where you've got greater urban concentrations.
But also the
there
opportunities are greater, right?
Yeah, but it's also, it was built some time ago with old tech. I mean, one of the great opportunities that Auckland's got is we're going to intensify with modern tech and modern thinking, and we've got the one-off shot of delivering intensity with good amenity, with good sustainable environment, with good sustainable assets, and do it extremely well. And we'll have failed miserably if we repeat all of those mistakes we can visibly see who were built when the technology simply wasn't understood or there.
Right. Just let's talk about New Zealand Inc. rather than Auckland, accepting that Auckland is a major component, a major stakeholder, a shareholder in that. How does New Zealand improve its productivity, improve its value, while taking climate change seriously in all the ways we've mentioned and more?
I think stop debating whether we believe all of this and just accept it, get a common set of facts and launch from there, so that we all, you started this evening talking about collective initiative. Martin talked about co-designing our future. I think it's all about how we all work together to land there. And I must say, I personally find it tiring debating whether the issue's as big as it is or it isn't. And I accept there are different ways to get to a better endpoint, but we just got to absolutely believe and go. And I think reports like are being launched this afternoon really help ground a stable base of fact, and people collectively will move from there.
I haven't heard anything, sorry, Martin, I haven't heard anything tonight that feels like a sacrifice. It all makes sense if you are people living, apart from, giving up meat and dairy produce. It all makes sense to people living in a collective, in a community, and not wanting to waste stuff, because what is the point of that? And so it all sounds very constructive, but there's got to be some sacrifice somewhere, right? What is that sacrifice? What does it look like? How are you going to persuade people to give up, and what?
I'm not sure it's a sacrifice. I mean, some things will be, I'm sure, but I think it's more the absolute call to make a decision to do things a different way and accept that changing patterns, habits, and so forth is hard. Because I think we are comfortable with what we do and sometimes ignorant or careless about the consequence of it.
I think there's a negative sacrifice in some ways. Like in some ways, Aucklanders at the moment, we're being tortured out of our cars by the CRL construction, because if you try to drive through Auckland Central, it's almost impossible. And so you realise actually...
Is that a plot, do you think?
Well, I think it's an unintended consequence, but in many ways it's a positive one. It's training us to use public transport. You go, actually, this isn't bad. you know, this works, I can do this, it's not that painful. And so I guess it's kind of, you give up pain in exchange for good stuff, and that kind of ultimately gets us further ahead. You know, it actually doesn't have to be sacrificing your good living standard, it's actually taking an alternative approach to a better life.
So I keep coming back to what Rangamati said before. If you take a long view and think about, okay, so one of the things that's really important to me in living in New Zealand is having the ability to go and get mahangakai, to be able to travel in a pretty short distance and live quite close to my work and where we play. If you take a longer term view, then you basically start to value that into your short-term decision-making, and that's what New Zealand has the opportunity to do. So it might be a short-term sacrifice, as you say. It might mean that we actually change some of what we do in the next decade. But, you know, one thing I know we are good at is adapting and being innovative and finding new ways of doing different things that mean that actually we take these things into account. And I think that's the prize here.
Yeah, I think if you are talking about it as a New Zealand Inc. point of view, New Zealand's a really attractive place to live. As you might tell, I'm not originally from New Zealand. I'm a Welshman by birth, but having worked in and around San Francisco, the cultures aren't too dissimilar to New Zealand, but this is just a better, easier standard of life. And if you're trying to rent a property in San Francisco, it's a technology business. If you don't take it there and then, you've lost it. You come to New Zealand and you think about, you know, you've got organisations like Xero based out of Wellington and the CEO, Rod Drury, from the Hawke's Bay. Why aren't we making the regions attractive places to attract high-calibre technology businesses where the work-life balance is phenomenal, and you start to bring highly skilled workers to those regions?
Is that a rhetorical question? Why aren't we making the regions more attractive? Have we got a government yet?
It becomes, you know, technology isn't really geographical specific, and it attracts highly skilled, highly ethical people who are very much environmentally conscious as well, to come and want to be part of New Zealand. And we don't have any problems attracting people from the US at the moment to come and want to live and work here. And I think that's one of our unique selling points in the future. It is a great place to live and work.
What worries me about all this is that, and it's about choice, and it's about encouraging people to make the right decision for the future. But you need a certain amount of personal resources to make those choices. How do you stop the inequities that are clear in New Zealand and clear in Auckland from growing even larger? Any comment on that, anyone? Because they will grow larger.
Look, I think that's a fabulous question, Kim. I think the piece here when you link inequity with digital innovation, the two are inextricably linked. They're linked, right?
Very closely.
They're very closely linked. The reality, whether we like it or not, is that digital innovation will be a key part of this world, and it will have an impact on the business models that we use, and it will be mechanisms for greater efficiencies. That is a fact, and I think about AI in terms of artificial intelligence, in my view, is a global trend that will change the way in which the labour force will move. So when I think about that, and I think about inequities, and I think about the 250,000 Māori people who are living in Tāmaki alone, when I think about the rates of educational underachievement, we need to change that landscape really quickly, and digital innovation will do that, because digital mediums will allow us to go further and faster. I think the other part about that is that if it's done well enough, particularly in the school environment, schooling doesn't begin at 9 and finish at 3. Schooling starts before that and ends past that. I have real concerns personally as a mother of 4 and looking after over 1,500 of our tribal descendants under the age of 18, that not enough of them have those mediums at their fingertips to be able to even think about how do we, when we know that this digital revolution is going to influence communications, transportation and energy, The reality is, if we're not clear about how those children are embarking, becoming digital natives in that space, they will not be able to get to the point where you choose whether you want a Tesla that can charge in a flash apartment or whether you've got an electric car. That will not be a choice. So I think sacrifice is not really the right word for me. I think this is about changing perceptions, behaviours and norms in the city so that actually our babies, because all of us, we're all adults here, right? My kids aren't screaming, so I know they're not in the crowd. But I think sometimes we're trying to have a conversation around the converted, where in actual fact the conversation belongs in the hearts of our babies. Our babies, my baby, my 7-year-old has been the one that's influenced the buying of these bags. She is just fanatical. We walk into the supermarket, we don't have the bag, we don't get the things Mum wants. We're out of there. They are the ones that are changing behaviours, and that's where true leadership, true change, and true sophistication is going to occur in this. That's how you're going to get the shift.
Sanctimonious kids, don't you hate them? David, you were saying earlier that one of the groups of people who are really wanting the type of impact investment that you're offering are the millennials. There seems to have been a sea change in that generation.
I think there has, very much so. They have much stronger value codes. They're growing up in a society where in many countries in the Western world, our children and their children are looking at having a lower standard of living than their parents for the first time since the Second World War. So you're seeing it now in the way that people invest, and you're seeing it increasingly in supply chain procurement, where it's also going the same way, where you're asking the supermarket where they buy their coffee, where they buy their groceries, their supplies that they sell to you, how it's all produced. So everybody coming up behind us is becoming more and more aware of environmental and social inequalities and wants us to do something.